Hello and welcome. The new emerging economies, sometimes called the growth net economies, offer a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of promise. But is it going to be simple to access that promise, particularly for Indian companies who've already formed a presence there, particularly in Latin America, in Africa, and for that matter, even ASEAN? Joining me now is Gautam Thapar, Chairman of the Avantha Group, also closely associated with the Aspen in India Forum, and to tell me how Indian companies or Indian businesses can navigate this great opportunity that really goes beyond the brick as we traditionally know it. So how are you seeing this world of the new emerging economies, and how can we utilize their presence more effectively?
Well, it's a lot more challenging than it used to be 3 years ago. I think economically the winds are not so much in favor of the way of these economies as they used to be 3 years ago. It's globally there's a huge deleveraging going on. Globally, cost of capital has risen. And clearly the slowdown in emerging market economies is impacting things. So having said that, business cannot work on the principle of, here today, gone tomorrow. So if there are opportunities, they are long-term in nature and they need to be pursued as long-term in nature. So we traditionally have tended to look at the West, buy in Europe, buy in the US, because, the size of the economy, especially in terms of technology, that's where you go. But in terms of maybe application of your level of technology that you have there, or the right markets, I think the growth net economies are maybe a little bit more appropriate for a lot of Indian companies. Tougher to sell into, but probably more appropriate.
And what should we be doing there? Or what are groups like Avantha doing, or what should countries like India be doing as a country, not just independent companies to capitalize on this?
I think that we, like many emerging market economies, we are very recent entrants into this game of internationalization and globalization. The capacity of Indian companies to take risk, especially in economies where maybe the rule of law is not so clear, or where legal redressal is not so clear, etc., is difficult. The limited resources Indian companies have also creates problems, that tomorrow if I do make a big push, if I do something, how do I manage if something goes wrong? And I think there's a great need for Indian business, whether large, medium, small, and government, whether it's MEA, all to sit down and think about these things. How do you mitigate risk? How do we become an effective partner in your growth aspirations? After all, the Government of India spends a lot of money in the way of grant, in the way of financial assistance to a large number of these countries. Yet there is a constant refrain that Indian business doesn't take advantage of it. The question is that Indian business is not necessarily looking only for the fact that the Government of India is prepared to provide financial assistance or interest rate differential cost and all that. The bigger risks are what happens if something goes wrong. What happens if I'm in a country where the legal system is not so clear? Can the government negotiate special terms under the assistance treaty that we give that protects Indian companies, and actually lowers their cost or lowers their risk of entry? I think these are the sort of things that need to happen more often. You don't worry so much about these things when you go to the West, because it's a well-defined legal system. You can do it. It's far riskier when you go into a lot of emerging market economies.
So you're also saying on the flip side that the opportunity is huge, but therefore requires
no
much more.
The old saying, for an entrepreneur, we take risk. That's our job. Question is that how can the government partner us in taking risks without getting into a moral hazard issue? And that's, there's a very clear way ahead if a partnership can be evolved, which says that there are certain aspects of opening up of a country that needs to be negotiated at the government level with business in mind, or with Indian business and investment in mind, that will spur Indian business and investment to go in. And the rest of it, certainly the entrepreneur, he will calculate his returns and he will go if he thinks it's
So can
important.
you expand on that? So you seem to have already given point number one of how, let's say, government can better engage with some of these new emerging economies so that it becomes easier for business. What would be the other?
Secondly, for example, country, we need infrastructure, but other countries maybe need even more infrastructure. If the financial grant or aid is being given for infrastructure development linked, how can you marry that into Indian business? Is there part of can we look at a joint investment agreement or free trade agreement that would actually facilitate those investments, etc.? We are in this country running into issues of land, of water, of this, that. Are there things that that we can move out the energy? You know, is there a goal or is there a policy to say that you know, we would like to reduce our dependence on energy-intensive industries and manufacturing and move them to, you know, into other countries, and let's see if we can go. So there's a lot that the government can facilitate simply because it is the government, and policies are not flowing from business. They actually, you know, flow from government, and and that two-way street of discussion, of negotiation, of up and down, that needs to be intensified far beyond what actually happens these days.
And you're also saying this in the context of a slowing global economy,
yeah,
and maybe a slowing Indian economy.
It is slowing Indian economy. Well, slowing Indian economy. Hopefully not, you know, beyond what we are. I think that we seem to have sort of troughed, and we seem to be sort of at the bottom of the trough and carrying on a little bit. But certainly in light of a glowing, of a slowing international economy. And if you look at the winds out there, you know, it's clearly the winds are behind the sails of the United States right now. And that has its own implications as to where capital is going to flow, because while a lot of capital has flowed out of the US, but the US is a vast country and can take in vast pools of capital. So if vast pools of capital suddenly start flowing out back into the US, it is not just India that has issues. I think the whole of the region has issues. Despite the fact that, you know, almost 43 or 44% of global growth now comes from Asia and from this part of the world, but still a chunk of it, a large chunk of it, is still underpinned by trade and investment coming out of the West. So I think these pools of capital, as they look for return, certainly today the vote seems to be very much in favor of the US.
So, you know, the government may also argue that it just doesn't have the capacity. You know, I mean, the size of our diplomatic force is smaller than very small countries. How could the government then scale up its efforts?
You need to expand the size of your diplomatic force in keeping with your aspirations. Or you should say that, look, we don't have these aspirations, in which case then, you know, it's a moot point what we're discussing. So you can't, you know, there's an old adage, you give peanuts, you get monkeys, you know. It's the same thing. If you want to do something, then you need to understand what it takes to get it done and put the resources behind it. Otherwise, it's a little drip, 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 and drip, drip, drip doesn't work. It really doesn't work. So yes, on a geopolitical stage, we understand who we need to have as allies, and these are not permanent. You know, they shift according to our needs as well. But we keep diplomatic. From a business and a commercial point of view, we need to be, you know, much clearer about, especially in growth net, emerging markets, where we want to do things and how we want to do them. Yeah.
So do you have a growth net favorite anecdote?
No. I don't have a growth net, except to say that this is, you know, again, one of those things that come out of discussions. So just when you're sitting around chatting, etc., what to do next, how do we move the agenda, especially in an environment where things have obviously in the last year and a half, both internally within India, you know, outside, there's been a mood of, how should I say, pessimism or negativity about what's happening. How do you actually start something that maybe is on a slightly different track, but interesting, and hopefully will grow into something that will over time become more and more important. So that's where the idea of the growth net comes. That why is the focus all the time purely on the US, Europe, etc. There are many other countries out there who have a lot to offer in terms of trade, in terms of opportunity. How do we actually get them on an agenda and start? And that's how this whole thing came about.
Right. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much, Mr. Thapar.
Thanks.